Okay, so the overall concept of differential association theory is pretty simple. Number one, criminal behavior is learned. It's not inherited. That's what this one means. It's not inherited. It's not because of a predisposition, like we were talking about at the end of class on Wednesday. It's not because of, say, a brain injury that impacts a person's ability to reason, that impacts a person's ability to make decisions, or that causes increased aggression. That is essentially a way that a person can be predisposed to crime. We're even starting to see a connection between early and prolonged exposure to lead during childhood and increased aggression because of what that exposure to that toxin does to the brain that is being formed, right? It's kind of like there's a brain injury that's happening. So this theory argues that, yes, a predisposition may be an underlying thing, but you aren't going to actually end up committing crime unless you know how to do it and have rationale as to why you'd want to, and also have a way of kind of convincing yourself why it's okay. So those are major things you want to remember about this theory: the how, the why, and the why it's okay. And we'll come back to those in a moment. So crime is learned. How? Through interacting with other people in a process of communication, through interacting and communicating with other people who do it. So it's not imitation. Certainly, children do imitate. I can give you lots of random examples from my own toddler of, for real, just direct imitation. But crime is more than simple imitation, right? There's a lot more going on there. Also, who you're learning from or who is teaching it matters. You're most likely to engage in crime, according to this theory, when you're learning it from others within your intimate personal groups. Now, we get back to that how, why, and why it's okay thing. So when the criminal behavior is learned, the learned includes how to do it, the techniques, right? And that might sound silly, as though, how to do it is obvious. And with some crimes and acts of deviance, like with some behaviors that are, mostly normative, like drinking alcohol, that may be true, right? It's a liquid, you drink it, okay? We get that. But at the least, you have to learn how to do it effectively. You have to learn how to do it in a way that's going to derive the most benefit, or minimize the chances of harm, or minimize the chances of getting caught. And this is where Howard Becker's article on becoming a marijuana user comes into play. So what he says in that article is basically, smoking marijuana is not really that intuitive. And he was also trying to provide a sociological explanation for drug use and argue that drug use and its effects, the effects of a drug, are going to vary based on where you're at when you're doing it, who you're with when you're doing it, right? And drug scholars kind of refer to that as set and setting. Where you're at and who you're with is going to influence the effect of the drug. And, prior to this point, which he's doing this in the 50s, which is kind of interesting just in and of itself. Most people talked about the effects of a drug being based on, just the psychopharmacology aspect, as well as, any variation would be explained by, individual differences in somebody's body type, right? Like men experience the drug in this way because they have more muscle mass, they're bigger, they weigh more, things like that. So yeah, he's saying basically smoking marijuana is really not that intuitive. You have to learn how to do it. You could think about, have you ever smoked cigarettes, right? Or did you ever hang out with anybody who smoked cigarettes, and did you watch them sort of learn how to do it, right? Did you do it perfectly the first time? Did they do it perfectly the first time, or did they cough and gag? Did they maybe throw up? I'll tell you right now, which is embarrassing, especially since I'm putting it on video, that, somebody had to point out to me when I first started smoking cigarettes. I don't smoke them anymore, but in late high school and early college, it was, everybody's doing it. Somebody pointed out to me one day, you're not inhaling. Like, you're smoking cigarettes wrong. You can't smoke cigarettes. And I didn't even understand what he's saying to me. And so he had to teach me how to, take it all the way into your lungs, right? I was just doing it very superficially. So anyway, if I were to bring a suitcase full of drug paraphernalia to class with drugs, most of you are very likely not going to be able to match all the drug paraphernalia up with each of its corresponding drug and then do all of those drugs properly on the first try, right? That's what Becker's arguing. You have to learn how to use it from others who already know, and then you have to learn how to perceive the effects of the drug. What he witnessed was people smoking marijuana for the first time, or first or second time, and not realizing that they were under its influence until experienced users could explain to them what exactly they should be feeling, what is normal to feel or experience, or point out to them, dude, you've had too much, you don't even know that you've had too much, but you've had too much, you're done now. And then they have to learn to define those effects as pleasurable. So, with marijuana, like Patty Adler explained and like Becker explains, people can experience things like paranoia. That doesn't sound positive. Hunger. It can get forgetful, confused, sleepy. And those aren't automatically pleasurable things, so people have to learn how to define those things as pleasurable. Perhaps, your forgetfulness make other people laugh, and so it's good in that way. Perhaps the food just tastes better, or, like in Ecstasy Rising, the music is supposed to sound better. Or perhaps you just learn how to, emphasize the positives and de-emphasize the negatives, right? The other really important thing that is learned in addition to the how, or the techniques, are the motives, drives, rationalizations, and attitudes. You learn why you'd want to do it, and you learn why it is okay. So let's think about the children in the favela. How did they learn to be a drug soldier? Well, they're instructed by those above them as to how to do certain things. But what else did they learn even earlier than that? Now, we don't see them learning. We don't see them being taught. We don't see them in some little how to be a gang leader, how to be a drug soldier class. But think back to the games that they talked about playing, if you remember that part of the film. They played cops and robbers, and nobody wanted to be the cops. That right there shows crime defined as favorable and the law defined as unfavorable. And then they took on the names of prominent drug soldiers and called each other by those names, which again, crime defined as favorable. They see the drug soldiers buying nicer clothes, nicer shoes, getting to date the Maria Gasolinas, if they have the nice motorbikes. And so, they learn they're developing the why. And they learn how much they could make doing legitimate work and see how much more they can make in the drug cartels. That's another why that easily translates into why it's okay. Now, a lot of that may be similar to what lots of young kids or lots of young boys do, but not all those kids grow up and commit crime or deviance, right? Of course, they're going to be exposed to favorable definitions sometimes, and what this theory argues is And this, number 6, is a key part of the theory. If you're exposed to far more definitions that are favorable to crime or deviance versus those against it, you're simply much more likely to take on those definitions and attitudes and rationalizations and engage in the crime and deviance that they support. The next one, number 7, often gets interpreted by students to refer to how a person's criminal acts vary in frequency, duration, etc. over the course of all or part of their life. And yes, that's true, but remember that we're trying to explain entry into crime or deviance, right? These criminological theories are about explaining onset or entry into crime or deviance. So this tenet of the theory actually is saying the more frequently you're exposed to those favorable definitions and to the people who define them that way, the more likely you're going to be to engage in the crime. The longer you're exposed, the more intense your relationship with those people, and the earlier in life that the exposure and those relationships begin, that's what priority means, the more likely the crime. Right? Okay, lastly, so this one usually needs a little explanation. Recall the beginning of the lecture, right? That criminal behavior isn't inherited, even if someone is predisposed, or even if someone experiences extremely intense strain, even if someone is victimized very unjustly. This theory argues that they're still not that likely to commit crime unless they know how and why, and they're not going to continue unless they have rationalizations for why it's okay. So in other words, strain is less important than the learning, right? The learning is the more sort of immediate thing, and thus it is the focal point, right? So what's the issue with this theory? Well, does everyone learn crime from others? Does anybody teach themselves? Does everyone learn from close personal groups of others versus people who aren't that close to them? Do they ever create it or figure it out for themselves? Can't a person develop their own rationalizations? Must those rationalizations be learned? And we'll look into those questions when we move into talking about loner deviance with the upcoming readings.